For many on the Christian right, President Trump's nomination of Brett Kavanaugh was the moment they've been waiting for. It was the culmination of a decades-long strategy to take over the American judiciary. But Democrats were suspicious of Kavanaugh's record, especially on abortion and gay rights.
The right for women to make their own medical decisions, including the right to an abortion and not a back alley butcher. The right of all Americans to marry who they love. These are our rights. These are our American rights.
The president that nominated you has said, I will nominate someone who is anti-choice, and we believe what he said.
One of the religious right's main goals is to reverse Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion. On live television, Donald Trump promised the religious right a Supreme Court that would advance their agenda.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
That promise sealed the unlikely deal between the religious right and a candidate whose personal scandals would seem to contradict Christian values.
All these years later, I'm quite ashamed.
Rob Schenck is an evangelical minister who spent more than 20 years doing congressional outreach for the religious right. He's recently had a change of heart about their political tactics.
The movement I was once a part of was always looking for an obsequious candidate who would more or less do our bidding.
I have been pro-life.
I know, what should the law, I know your principle, that's a good value, but what should be the law?
So when I saw Donald Trump in an interview with Chris Matthews, and Matthews specifically asked him, should women who are seeking abortion be punished?
Should abortion be punished?
And I saw Trump hesitate for a minute, and then reiterate what had been discussed in many a strategy meeting of the past. Yeah, women probably do have to face some kind of punishment.
There has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
But we were always hunting for the guy who would take our script and read it, who would make the Faustian bargain.
Thousands of Christian activists come to Washington, D.C. for the Values Voters Summit every year. It's part political convention, part rally, a laboratory where they hope to convert their beliefs into political action.
He promised them that he would give them everything they wanted: the Supreme Court of their dreams, anti-abortion laws, judges who would do away with Roe v. Wade and marriage equality. And so they took the deal, and now he's given them what they want. Their goal was to take operational control of one of the political parties. And they've effectively done that. They have basically made the Republican Party the religious rights party.
And I think that there's people that are at this point, and they would love to take the opportunity to take God completely out of the conversation and completely out of any public realm. And I am just the opposite. I am just the opposite. I do believe in God, and I do believe that my life revolves around my religious belief, who I am, my nation, my country. That is what I stand for.
Where do you stand on the separation of church and state?
I don't see a separation between church and state.
At all?
Okay. In my life of who I am, I'm a Christian, whether I am sitting and voting on a piece of legislation, or whether I'm sitting at the beach with my family. I should be a Christian all the way through.
Project Blitz is a collection of religious liberties bills written by the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation. It's a national think tank for the religious right, which pushes these bills out to their network of state legislators to be turned into law.
Over 30 states, the Congressional Prayer Caucus has existing prayer caucuses that exist to create this Christian America.
In the spring of 2018 alone, 74 Project Blitz bills were introduced in at least a dozen states, according to the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation.
They build momentum very intentionally towards this goal of making America a Christian nation and imposing their worldview, which is this political, discriminatory worldview, on the rest of us. Pence is another excellent ally to this community because he's a true believer. He comes from this community, and he is a white fundamentalist Christian who's been in lockstep with that religious right agenda for his entire career.
And if we can hold on to this Senate majority for 2 more years, we're going to transform the federal judiciary with men and women who believe in this vision of America.
Just 2 years into his term, President Trump has appointed more judges on federal appeals courts than any of his recent predecessors.
This is the fastest pace in the history of our country. If you want to have a long-time impact, the single most consequential thing we can do is these lifetime appointments of men and women to the court.
The goal here is clear. Keep electing Republicans in order to stack local and federal courts with judges who are sympathetic to the religious rights views, in the hope that they'll push through laws that may not have popular support.
So the impact is going to be huge outside the Supreme Court. You know, if they had 8 years of Trump and they got 400 or 500 federal judges from Trump who come out of the right-wing movement, they could not only get rid of Roe v. Wade and get rid of Obama's health care, they could literally roll back the clock 150 years.
The Supreme Court has announced today that it will hear a major abortion case this session. The case is centered around Louisiana's Republican-backed law requiring doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at a local hospital. This will be the first major abortion-related case heard by the Supreme Court since Justice Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed.
Good morning, Anne Marie. So what's so interesting about this Louisiana law is, there's a lot of layers to it, and it takes a lot to kind of peel back and understand what's going on in this law. And I should also mention it's a very common law that you see all over the country, which is why this case is so important and could have so many implications around the country. So basically what it is it says that if you are an abortion-providing doctor, you have to have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital. So in case something goes wrong, you have a relationship with a hospital so you can immediately send a patient there.
Hearing that the Supreme Court is going to look at this Louisiana case, doing a little bit of reading, and I see that this Louisiana law is very, very similar to a law in Texas that was already struck down by the Supreme Court in 2016. Do you know what's, and I know you're not, our Supreme Court correspondent, do you know what's different about this law? What makes it different than the one in Texas, and so why it's being looked at now?
So that's another really interesting point about this. It is virtually identical to that Supreme Court case that you saw in 2016 that's called Whole Women's Health. And just in right now is actually a quote from the Center for Reproductive Rights. They're the lead attorney on this case. I'd love to read to you what they have to say. Louisiana is openly defying the Supreme Court's decision from just 3 years ago, in which they found an identical Texas law unconstitutional. We are counting on the court to follow its precedent. Otherwise, clinics will needlessly close, and there will be one doctor left in the entire state to provide abortion care. Now, that's from Nancy Norda, the president and CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights.
Now, what is significant about this version of the court hearing this case is we now have Justice Brett Kavanaugh. So the court has tipped more conservative, one could argue. You speak on a regular basis to, abortion advocates. How concerned are they about the Supreme Court taking a second look at a case like this?
They're very concerned, Anne Marie. I mean, it's, one could not argue. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the Supreme Court has a very different makeup than it did back in 2016 when Whole Women's Health was decided. Now, earlier this year, I actually spoke to the lead attorney on this case, TJ2. Now, he was telling me Brett Kavanaugh was actually the one who wrote the dissent for this case back when they saw it in February. And, it's a 4-page decision. You can dissect it, and it's really hard to understand what his thinking is on whole women's health. That's, of course, the precedent that talks about admitting privileges, which will be so critical when the Supreme Court justices look at this case. Now, what Tu told me is that it was very hard to see what Kavanaugh's thinking is on whole women's health. It was unclear whether or not he supported it because it was the only precedent he referenced in his entire brief. So it's very unclear whether or not he supported it or whether he thinks it was wrongfully decided.
Many pro-life advocates, Paul, are hoping the court might end up reversing Roe v. Wade because of this case. What do you think the odds are of that?
Well, that's sort of interesting. Like I said, Kennedy is gone now. That's the main difference. And he would usually vote with the pro-abortion side. Now we have Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and people tend to think that they're on the pro-life side. The thing is, we don't really know. We haven't had a chance to see what happens with these decisions. Also, John Roberts, the Chief Justice, he's sort of a wild card. He is the one, before this, they put this Louisiana law on a stay, and he's the one who voted with the liberal side to do that. So we have these wild cards, Kavanaugh and the Chief Justice himself. So we have to see. But a lot of people right now are saying this is the first time that it looks like a 5-4 majority for the pro-life side. So that's why folks are hopeful that this could be used to overturn Roe v. Wade, because they're saying, well, you're getting in there and you're messing around with abortion anyway. Why not go all the way and put severe restrictions on it? So that's the argument.
I want to ask you, what's really at the core of this, and what does this mean? Absolutely. So the Louisiana case that is going before the Supreme Court, it's an admitting privilege case. Now, what that means is that essentially the state law from Louisiana says that if you are a doctor that provides abortion, you have to have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital. Now, why that is so difficult is that there's no law that compels the hospital to give an abortion provider admitting privileges. So what you end up happening is all of these abortion providers would love to get admitting privileges, but they can't get them because none of these hospitals will allow them to get the privileges. So what ends up happening is the clinics have to close. Now, why this is so critical is that the Supreme Court has actually already ruled on a case identical to this. Back in 2016, they looked at Whole Women's Health. That was a reference to a clinic in Texas. Again, virtually the exact same law. So why agree to take it up then if they've done this, right? Well, that's the huge question, right? And what's different? The only thing that has changed between 2016 and today is a new makeup on the Supreme Court. You have 2 new justices who are both conservative. The Kennedy vote is not there anymore. So even though none of the facts have changed in this case, the situation hasn't changed, none of the precedent has changed, who is deciding this case has dramatically shifted. And what it would mean for other states that have passed admitting privileges that were then found unconstitutional because of Whole Women's Health, all of those laws, they would, take another crack at them and effectively could really significantly shut down abortion care.